Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, live at halftime of Monday Night Football, halftime of the second game for the Week 3 Waiver Wire Preview Pod. As always, we will be discussing and previewing the waiver wire column at 4for4.com, which you can go to right now, out every Monday afternoon. Currently, the drop list is available to everyone, and then the positional rankings, contingency top 10, everything else ranked for everyone accordingly. As always, this show is also brought to you by our friends at Sleeper, one of the fastest growing customizable fantasy football platforms in the entire industry. And that's important to know because if you have the Sleeper app, you can actually go in there now and you can pick up our Sleeper waiver wire pickup of the week. And that would be none other than Garrett Wilson. I understand Garrett Wilson may not be available in some of your leagues, but I know from experience in some even higher stakes leagues, Garrett Wilson was already dropped. And if that's the case, what we saw in week 2 calls for us to run to the waiver wire on Sleeper and pick him up because his route participation on Joe Flacco's dropbacks increased from 56% in the season opener to 75% as the team's second wideout. Garrett Wilson also currently leads the league in red zone targets. And although Joe Flacco may be 9 of 20 right now from the red zone, the fact is he's honed in on one particular receiver in that money territory. There's also meat on the bone here for Garrett Wilson because he briefly exited Sunday with an injury and then returned. So not only did he eat into Braxton Berrios' routes, there are still Corey Davis's routes he could eat into as well. After this past week, he averaged an elite 37.8% target per route run rate. Now, weekly viability like he showed on Sunday, I don't think so. This is still Joe Flacco, and it's only week 2. So we don't expect the Jets' top 2 rate and plays per game to continue, right? We don't expect Joe Flacco to reach 50 pass attempts per game as he's done through 2 games. Just like the Bears offense, we don't expect them to average 14 passes per game. It's only week 2. We are going to get natural regression from these offenses. And thus, I don't think 2 receivers can get there for the Jets. It's probably either Elijah Mitchell or Garrett Wilson weekly, especially because we have Tyler Conklin quietly soaking up a 20% target share the past 2 games. We don't know how long CJ Uzomah will be out, but Conklin himself is a threat to basically one of these receivers not getting there weekly. And so it's probably going to be volatile. There are going to be ebbs and flows with Garrett Wilson's production, but if he's on your waiver wire, he's already shown enough that you need to pick him up and hope he's the one that gets there. If not, it'll likely be Elijah Moore. Also, what we did last week, I would like to do again because Garrett Wilson, not available in every league, but in much deeper leagues, if you go into your Sleeper app, Ashton Dulin probably is available. And what happens when Ashton Dulin has to play behind Michael Pittman, who was out this past week with a quad injury, and Alec Pierce, who had a concussion in week 2? I don't know. But what we do know so far is that Dulin has earned a target on 32% of his routes. Again, an elite metric, including leading Indianapolis in target share, 7 targets for a 23% target share without Michael Pittman on Sunday. So at the very least, what I'm doing is dropping Paris Campbell, who's only recorded a 7% target share through the first 2 games, despite being the team's first wideout in routes run, depending if Michael Pittman's been on the field. Or in deeper leagues, dropping Alec Pierce, because Ashton Dulin has essentially already emerged over Alec Pierce, and I want to be ahead of that movement for when Pierce returns. Again, we don't know what's going to happen, but I know I would drop those 2 certainly for a outright trade for Ashton Dulin on waiver wires. Remember, head to sleeper.com or download the app like all of us use today. Moving on, everyone wants to talk about Trey Lance's injury and what to do in his stead for the 49ers offense. What we know is that this offense now goes back to what we've seen with Jimmy Garoppolo in the past. The same offense that entrusted its backfield for a combined 26 touches per game last year and finished 30th in pass play rate from neutral game script. And we saw they leaned on the run yet again when Trey Lance went out. Jeff Wilson, 18 carries as expected, 56% of the team's running back carries in week 2, and Tyrion Davis-Price with 14. But we also know TDP suffered a high ankle sprain, so not only expected to be out, quote unquote, a few weeks, we know high ankle sprains basically ruin him probably for his rookie year, probably for a month, 2 months after he's even eligible to return. So he's no longer the person we're looking at whatsoever. What happens now is we react the same way we did last week whenever we were picking up Jeff Wilson. And then everyone also, if they didn't feel like getting into a bidding war on waiver wires, went straight for Tyrion Davis-Price or Jordan Mason instead. That's what we're doing this week. Instead of Tyrion Davis-Price, though, we're going Marlon Mack because Marlon Mack is on the practice squad. If you got Jordan Mason for minimum, you keep him because, again, Trey Lance's 12.5 carries per game that he averaged in 3 full starts aren't log jamming this offense anymore. There are now more carries to go around. So it's not just Jeff Wilson. It's not just Deebo Samuel. We can actually fit another running back for 10 to 15 carries per game in this offense. You may also ask, what about Jimmy Garoppolo? I'm not as high on him. Remember, last year, 29 attempts per game, QB 17 in fantasy points per game. Nothing to get excited about unless we're talking about it as a matchup-based streamer for projected shootouts. But lazily thinking Garoppolo is the one-for-one trade-off for Trey Lance in your home leagues is probably not the right answer. I'm probably looking for Carson Wentz. Jared Goff even gets an up-tempo matchup against the Vikings this upcoming week. Joe Flacco, again, if we're talking about Wilson, Joe Flacco against a fast-paced Bengals attack seems like a good short-term streamer. But don't go directly for Garoppolo. And feel free to spend minimum yet again, seeing what the outcome is with both Marlon Mack and Jordan Mason on waiver wires. Another important topic is whether or not to drop Kadarius Toney. I wish I had the courage, like a lot of you probably are doing, to drop Kadarius Toney. I'm not there yet, though. We know Wan'Dale Robinson's absence is still occurring. We don't know how much longer, but still sidelined. Kadarius Toney, of course, dealing with on-field issues and issues of getting on the field. And Kenny Golladay is basically retired already. So what that led the Giants to do was run David Seals for our team high in routes in week 2 and Sterling Shepard for the second most routes in the team. Shepard being an intriguing option because he accrued a team high 29% target share and 43% of the team's air yards from Daniel Jones. Would I drop Toney for Shepard outright? That's the question we come back to, and the answer is no right now. At least we saw Toney snaps increase from 12% in the season opener to 38% being in week 2. So I would like to see one more game, thinking that Kenny Golladay will be healthy scratched, thinking he won't be part of the game plan. So where else can they go? And maybe they do go straight to Seals, Shepard, and Richie James, the third receiver. But I want to give Kadarius Toney one more week. And maybe I'm the sucker, but one more week. James Conner, we know, although we've already heard from Ian Rappaport that it is not expected to be a long-term injury, nothing serious, he said. We still saw what happened once James Conner exited with his ankle injury in the second half of week 2. And what that led to was surprising outcome, actually. Darrell, the mentor Williams, out-carrying Eno Benjamin 8-5 and handling both of the Cardinals' backfield touches inside the 10-yard line. Now, follow me down the path of numbers. Eno Benjamin did out-target Darrell Williams 4-3, but they mirrored each other in routes, essentially. Darrell Williams had 27 routes, Eno Benjamin 24. And more importantly, Darrell Williams outsnapped Eno Benjamin 11-2 on third down. So now we're talking about third down passing usage, third down usage altogether, right? And goal line carries, at least what we saw in the first game. And although Darrell Williams was active in week 1, whenever Eno Benjamin got worked in garbage time, my initial narrative was that's because they're just not going to play him all together. But playing him in a competitive game as the Cardinals caught back up in the second half, Maybe Benjamin played in garbage time in week 1, a 3-score blowout in week 1 because he's the garbage time back. Maybe Darrell Williams is the player they covet more and didn't want to play him. So I'm changing my narrative up. I think it's reacting accordingly, not overreacting. And thus, I'm picking up Darrell Williams over Benjamin if you told me to pick one today. I think that's the way I'll be stashing them moving forward. And I want to at least have them stashed knowing James Conner, of course, has yet to play a full season his entire career. And he's already dealing with an ankle injury in week 2, foretelling of what we should do on our rosters behind him. Now, everyone's favorite segment, some quick deep cuts for everyone before we get to a couple questions to close the show. Drew Sample, I understand you may not know what's going on in Drew Sample's life, but he suffered an in-game injury, and that actually allowed Hayden Hurst to stay on the field for a route on 85% of Joe Burrow's dropbacks. And now we've seen Hayden Hurst record at least 7 targets in 2 consecutive games. So given what we expect to be an up-tempo game script in a favorable spot against the Jets, we saw David Njoku even bounce back somewhat with 7 targets in week 2 against the Jets front 7, who struggles in the middle of the field but is great from the boundary. Given the up-tempo game script, Hayden Hurst is definitely a player I just plug in as a top 10 tight end. You just plug him in. Some of you may have questions about Cole Kmet. Some of you may have questions about Hunter Henry. I'm playing Hayden Hurst over both of them this week. We also saw Brevin Jordan suffer an in-game injury. And you would think that would help out O.J. Howard. But now O.J. Howard has still stuck in his role as the team's 3rd tight end with only 6 routes in back-to-back games. We instead saw a usage increase for Pharaoh Brown, who ran 24 routes instead on Davis Mills' 43 dropbacks in week 2. And I'm not saying go out and get Pharaoh Brown. I think the sneaky connection in place of Brevin Jordan may be more targets for Nico Collins. We saw 9 targets for Nico behind Brandon Cooks' 10, and more importantly, a career-high target share for Nico Collins in week 2. So for deeper leagues, I think I'm treating that as the connection rather than going to chase Pharaoh Brown, especially because there are still some sneaky tight ends on waiver wires. I write about them on the column, Juwan Johnson included, Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan, still seeing their snaps slowly increase, progressively be more involved as they get healthier. There are many options we can use over Brevin Jordan's backup, basically. Another quick note is that Sammy Watkins was the one who survived Allen Lazard's debut on Sunday night, because every other receiver for the Packers, their route participation, the routes they ran on Aaron Rodgers' dropback sank. But Sammy Watkins survived still with a route on 65% of dropbacks and ran the second most routes for Green Bay. So if I were ranking them rest of season right now in week 2, because I guess I'm forced to, it would be Allen Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Randall Cobb, in that order. Dalton Schultz also suffered an injury. And rather than running to Jake Ferguson or Sean McKeon, maybe the answer is just Noah Brown. We know Noah Brown not only has a rapport and history with Cooper Rush this year, but historically since 2017, since the Cowboys don't shuffle their roster and don't care about winning football. They just re-sign the same players over and over again. And so maybe that's what led Noah Brown to earning a 16% target share and the Cowboys' only end zone target on Sunday. So now with Dalton Schultz potentially sidelined and Michael Gallup reportedly on a pitch count, quote unquote, whenever he returns, it may not even be week 3. I think Noah Brown's the standout there. That's the player who earns target, at least on waiver wires. Maybe the answer is Tony Pollard, who did have a 22% target share this past game, even though his actual share of backfield touches increased just by 1%, basically did nothing from weeks 1 to 2. He was just jammed more opportunity. So I don't know if that sticks or not. The answer on waiver wires, at least, I think actually is Noah Brown, and it's probably viable enough to test in 12-team leagues. And then finally, Mike Evans suspended 1 game, we know. And Breshad Perriman is the target for me. Yes, Scotty Miller did have a team high target share, 8 targets, but Breshad Perriman, a proven, consistent NFL receiver for 4 years now, usually at the end of seasons because injuries open up opportunities. But Breshad Perriman has done this where he splashed from time to time and helped us out for stints. And we saw that too. 5 targets, 14.7% target share in week 2. And he played on 75% of the snaps in a tough matchup against the Saints, spiking a long touchdown. So in this 1 week stead, I don't want to go overboard, of course, because the Bucs are no longer a pass-heavy team. The Bucs are averaging 30 pass attempts per game, and we are now pretty sure it is because of their offensive line injuries, forcing them to become a Leonard Fournette engine as opposed to the same team that passed at the highest rate on first down last year and averaged a league-high 40 pass attempts per game the past 2 seasons. That's not this offense. There are only so many answers right now with so many injuries in this offense, and Perriman is the one for me. One more quick pickup about George Pickens, because we have questions about George Pickens and Darnell Mooney. And I will say, Darnell Mooney, good matchup against the Texans this week. An offense, again, could, but it's only week 2. We don't expect to pass the ball 14 times a game. And as for George Pickens, the routes are there. The targets are not. I would imagine with the week 9 bye coming up, we get Kenny Pickett sooner than we all think. And maybe that's not the answer. Maybe that leads to absolutely nothing. But I'm holding George Pickens because the routes essentially match Chase Claypool's and Deontay Johnson's. 3 wide sets are set in stone. It's just the 6 targets that are lacking right now. Week 3, waiver wire column, on44.com. Reminder, you to use the promo code Daigle10 if you would like to sign up. You can get the rest of everything there. We will be back Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern for the Week 3 usage review, buy low, sell high, and matchup preview show with John Paulson and Sam Hoppin. So until then, remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.